Today, the head teacher found a love letter in my desk. To punish me, she actually called my parents directly and asked my mom to read it out loud in public. I was almost crazy with anxiety because the person I confessed to in the love letter was none other than the head teacher, Sophia. I tried desperately to stop all this, but my dad, standing beside me, thought it was embarrassing and firmly pressed my shoulders. My mom, standing on the podium, was so ashamed that she was trembling all over. Let's start. Remember to subscribe if you like it, said Sophia, the head teacher, in a cold tone. Senior year of high school is the most important time for you, but some students just don't focus on their studies. I don't know what's going on in their heads. She picked up my love letter, looked at the word dear on the cover, and said loudly, James, I found this in your desk during morning self-study. Now let your mom read it aloud with emotions and see who your dear one is. Sophia handed the love letter to my mom, who took it hesitantly and whispered to her, Teacher Sophia, children have self-esteem. Can we solve this privately? The head teacher refused sternly, puppy love is absolutely unacceptable in our school. If I don't make an example of this today, how can I lead this class in the future? My mom explained, my son just wrote a love letter and didn't even send it out. Maybe he wanted to confess after graduation. There shouldn't be a big problem with that, right? The head teacher glanced at my mom and retorted, James having such thoughts is wrong. If the parents are not willing to read it today, then take the child home to reflect for a week. My mom fell silent immediately. My dad couldn't help but say, Teacher Sophia, we'll read it. Missing a week of classes in senior year will make my son fall far behind. The head teacher nodded, okay, remember to read it loudly so that all the classmates can hear clearly who his dear one is. My mom had no choice but to open the love letter and start reading. I still remember your gentle appearance. Your hair fell on your shoulders in the sunset, and there was a faint lavender scent. I don't know why you wear glasses now, tie up your ponytail, and are always cold to people all day long. All the classmates in the class looked at me in surprise. The head teacher pushed her glasses, flicked her ponytail, and sneered, it seems that the girl you like is quite self-aware. She knows that senior year is important and knows how to hide her beauty and focus on the right things. But your mind is full of dirty things. I stared at Sophia, the class teacher, who couldn't take my eyes off. The image of her that day flashed through my mind. In the sunset, her hair was scattered, with a faint lavender scent. She gently kissed my forehead. Her lips had a sweet fragrance, soft and smooth. It was the taste of lychee-flavored lip balm. That day, my lips were chapped. She took out her lip balm, held my face, and gently applied it to my lips. Just then, my mom read, what I can't forget the most is when you helped me apply lip balm. I was very shy, but with a bit of a boy's stubbornness, I pretended to be disgusted and said it was yours. You said my lips were chapped and bleeding. I closed my eyes shyly. You chuckled and then gently applied it for me. Hearing this, the head teacher slapped the desk hard. With a pop, she said coldly, I take back what I said just now. It seems that this female classmate is not self-aware at all. She is simply indecent and has no sense of shame. All of you listen carefully. If I catch any boy-girl pair in our class sharing a lip balm, I will directly call the parents. After that, Sophia nodded to my mom, indicating that she should continue reading. My mom said in a low voice, many years have passed since this incident, and I still can't forget it. To you, I'm just a passer-by in your life, but to me, you changed my whole life. I heard that you have excellent academic performance and will surely be admitted to a key school in the future. I'm different. Everyone says I only skip classes, have poor grades, and will surely be good for nothing in the future. You are like a noble young lady in ancient times, while I'm just a humble poor farmer. The head teacher couldn't help laughing when she heard this. Here it comes, the adolescent boy's euphemistic writing. Girls in the class, listen carefully from now on. Boys love to say these sentimental and disgusting sentences. They belittle themselves and praise the girls highly, and then use a retreat as an advanced strategy, trying to get the girls' sympathy. All the girls in the class nodded seriously and began to listen attentively. My mom was so angry that she was trembling all over. She continued to read, in order to follow your footsteps, I never skipped classes again. I got up at 2 o'clock every day to cook and make medicine for my mom. The head teacher felt something was wrong and interrupted my mom. Wait a minute, what cooking and making medicine? My mom wiped her tears and said softly, Teacher Sophia, I was ill when James was a child and lay in bed for a year. His dad had to earn money to support the family, so James had to skip classes every day and come back early to cook and make medicine for me. That's why his academic performance was so poor. Later, he suddenly decided to study hard and got up very early every day to do housework, all to take care of me. The head teacher let out an "oh" in embarrassment, nervously rubbed the chalk, and said, "Continue reading." I didn't expect that James is such an infatuated person. He fell in love with her since he was a child, right? My mom continued reading, "I know it's hard to like you because you are going far and high. I studied twice as hard just to meet you and hoped to be admitted to the Provincial Key High School like you. But the result was that The head teacher immediately interrupted, "The result was that you didn't get in. Our school is not a Provincial Key High School. The result is that because you were full of thoughts about love, you didn't get into the Provincial Key High School. Classmates, this is a bloody lesson. The girl James likes can get into a Provincial Key School, but he missed the girl he liked. What does this mean? It means that if you don't study hard, you will even miss love." My mom said in a low voice, "Teacher Sophia, the next sentence my son wrote is that the result was that I didn't get in, but I met you here." The head teacher's face turned a bit ugly, and she said, "It seems that girl didn't focus on her studies either. Indeed, such an indecent and shameless girl can't be good at studying. Continue reading." Looking at the head teacher's somewhat embarrassed expression, I thought, I know she was admitted back then. I thought I couldn't follow Sophia's footsteps, but unexpectedly, when I came here, she became my head teacher. Fate arranged for us to meet again. My mom continued reading, "When you met me, you just smiled and nodded at me. I think you must not remember the little boy who was crying on the ground back then." Suddenly, the head teacher exclaimed exaggeratedly, "Oh my God, a crying little boy. I'm so embarrassed that I'm getting goosebumps all over. This euphemistic writing really amuses me. Why are you so fond of crying? What happened? Did the sky fall or the earth cave in? Why are you so fragile? It's really hilarious." The girls in the class also nodded in agreement, and some girls couldn't help scratching their arms as if they really had goosebumps. The head teacher sneered at me, "Do you feel so embarrassed that you want to cry now, that crying little boy?" Looking at her making faces, I just thought she was so cute. Help, why is every move of hers so sweet and lovely? I really can't resist it. If my embarrassment can bring some fun to Sophia from her busy work, then I'm willing. My mom continued reading, "That year, that day, my mom had an operation. The doctor said she had a 50% chance of not waking up. I was so afraid that I would lose my mom in the future. I cried so helplessly." The head teacher was speechless and interrupted, "Wait a minute." She looked at me embarrassedly and asked, "You cried because of this?" I nodded. The head teacher froze. The next second, Sophia turned around and bowed seriously to my mom, saying, "I sincerely apologize. I didn't know you cried because of this. I sincerely say sorry to you." The classmates who had laughed along just now were all embarrassed and at a loss. One hot-tempered guy even slapped himself and muttered, "I'm really damned." My mom also wiped her tears and continued reading the love letter. "When I was a child, I wasn't sure about this feeling. When you kissed my forehead, I thought it was just a beautiful picture staying in my heart. But when I met you, my heart was pounding. Everything around seemed to quiet down, and only the sound of my heartbeat could be heard. Your smile became slow motion and was imprinted in my mind. I realized that I really love you. Since the day I met you, I'm sure that I deeply love you. I'm glad that I was 10 points short of being admitted to the Provincial Key High School, so that I could meet you earlier." The head teacher said coldly, "You should be ashamed of your poor grades instead of being glad." Wait a minute. The head teacher then realized something was wrong and asked my mom, "Was he only 10 points short of the Provincial Key High School back then?" My dad took the initiative to say, "Teacher Sophia, this is my fault. The 10 points the child missed were in the physical education exam. Just like the child said, our family are farmers. I'm just a construction worker. That day, I went out to repair a roof for someone and fell off the roof. My son had to carry me to find a doctor the day before the physical education high school entrance exam." The head teacher turned to my father and asked, "Can 10 points be bought?" My dad sighed and replied, "10 points cost tens of thousands of yuan. Our family is poor, and my son couldn't bear to spend the money." The head teacher was speechless. She walked back and forth on the podium with her hands behind her back, as if hesitating whether to let my mom continue reading. All the classmates in the class also looked at the head teacher a bit awkwardly. Finally, the head teacher said, "These moral characters are still okay. So since you have good moral characters and have the opportunity of the college entrance examination, why did you choose puppy love and ruin your future? You are still young and your mind is not mature enough. You can't get in touch with some things too early. When you become an adult, you can fall in love however you want, and no one will care. But now you should focus on your studies and study hard. My mom quickly said, James is already 18 years old. He repeated a grade to take care of me. The head teacher was speechless and said firmly, even if he's 18, he's still a student and should continue to study hard in school. My mom had to continue reading. These years have been the happiest days of my life. I looked forward to seeing you and watched you every day in class. The head teacher said seriously, in class, what you should look at is the teacher and the blackboard. Your eyes should be on knowledge. I nodded and silently said in my heart that my eyes have always been on her. My mom read, I once thought about telling you my feelings, but I was always hesitant. Until that day you came to my home and sat on my bed. You were wearing beautiful brand name clothes, which were so out of place with my shabby home. That scene deeply hurt my heart. Suddenly, the head teacher flew into a rage. She picked up a book and threw it at me fiercely, shouting, The girl went to your home? And sat on your bed? I didn't dodge and looked directly at her. That day, she came for a home visit. I still remember that I wanted to pour her a cup of tea, but my family didn't even have a beautiful glass. I could only open a box of Xiangpiaopio milk tea that my mom's factory gave at Christmas and made her a cup. Our family was always reluctant to open gifts because we could give them to other relatives. It was very cold that day, and my parents only put a heater in my room. The head teacher held the milk tea, sat on my bed, took a sip with the straw, then looked up, smiled sweetly, and said to me, It's so warm. I sat beside her. After so many years, it was the first time I was alone with Sophia. Everyone else was afraid of home visits, but I was the only one who hoped that the time that day could last longer. I was reluctant to let her leave, but I didn't want her to see too much of my poverty. My mom was reading my love letter, already in tears. She read, When you sat in my home, I really wanted to tell you that I had been looking for you for many years and following you for many years. I love you like the wind that travels thousands of miles, like the clouds that float thousands of miles. Day after day, year after year. The little boy who once went out to pick up cardboard boxes to subsidize the family has seriously fallen in love with a girl he can't reach. I was once full of enthusiasm, thinking that I could make a name for myself. But when you sat in my shabby home wearing a Chanel scarf, dressed like a beautiful doll, I realized that you were ultimately a painting that didn't exist in my life. The head teacher frowned, looking thoughtful, as if she understood something, and her expression changed slightly. My mom held the love letter, her eyes filled with tears, and choked, Son, don't think like that. It's us who dragged you down. Your dad and I are useless. You've always been a good boy. The head teacher said anxiously, Parent, don't say that. My mom said hoarsely, What makes my son unworthy of her? He helped with housework when he was very young and took care of me in bed. I gave him 5 yuan every day for breakfast in the bus, but every morning he just held a steamed bun and an English book and walked to school at 5 o'clock in the morning. My dad lowered his head and said nothing. The love letter fell to the ground. The head teacher grabbed my mom's hand and said hurriedly, Let's not read it anymore. We don't read it anymore. She took out a tissue to wipe my mom's tears, then said to everyone a bit anxiously, Classmates, this thought has deviated from the topic. But I want to make it clear to you that don't look down on a young man because of his poverty. You are in your youth, and you should never have such a self-deprecating attitude. A classmate couldn't help saying, I've been to his home. His home really looks poor. If the girl wears Chanel, his family really can't match. Their parents are on completely different levels, right? The head teacher was anxious and quickly explained, In the first 30 years of life, people respect the son because of the father, in the next 30 years, they respect the father because of the son. This love letter is wrong. You haven't started to realize your own value yet. Life has infinite possibilities. Don't compare your value with that of other people's fathers. The next second, I stood up, walked to the podium, picked up the love letter, turned around, and saw the head teacher, Sophia, looking panicked. The sunset sunlight fell on her face. That year, that day, Sophia was also so beautiful. The adults thought I didn't understand and let me go to the park to play, but actually I understood everything. The cold wind was blowing. I was sitting in the park in front of the hospital, crying. She came up to me. At that time, she wasn't as serious as she is now. She was dressed very youthfully, with a shoulder bag, chewing bubble gum. When I looked up, she blew a bubble and also handed me a piece of bubble gum, saying, Kid, what are you crying for? I was young at that time and pointed at the hospital, crying that my mom was going to leave me. Sophia immediately understood what I meant, stroked my head, and said I was thinking nonsense. No one would be willing to leave with such a cute son. I still cried, and she squatted down and hugged me in her arms. When people are sad, they always long for a warm hug. I didn't dare to cry in front of adults. I knew that my dad was running around for my mom's illness and was always on edge every day. That day, I cried my heart out in the arms of a strange sister. She didn't say a word of comfort, just gently patted my back, just like my mom used to coax me when I was a child. I remember the way the sunset fell on her, her faint lavender scent, the temperature of her embrace, the taste of that lip balm, and I will always remember that when I stopped crying, she kissed my forehead and told me, "A boy can cry when he can't hold it in, and he's still a man after crying." I picked up the love letter, looked straight into her eyes. The head teacher gritted her teeth and asked, "James, what do you want to do?" I looked at her and replied, "I wrote this, so let me finish reading it." Sophia said anxiously, "Don't read it anymore. Teacher has understood. This love letter is about your feelings. Reading it like this will have a bad impact on you." I closed my eyes, then said resolutely, "It's okay, teacher. I don't care about other people's eyes anymore. Since I can't hide it, why should I hide it? It's better for me to be open-minded and face my heart." The head teacher interrupted in horror, "You can hide it. Why can't you hide it? Teacher already knows that you have good moral characters. Let's end this matter today. No one is allowed to mention it again, okay? Let's consider it a secret of our whole class." I shook my head and said, "No. Teacher Sophia, you taught us that we all must have the courage to face our mistakes and take responsibility for them. Avoidance doesn't necessarily mean you can escape, and facing them doesn't necessarily mean it's the most unbearable thing. Since I've made a mistake, I should be punished. Only in this way do I deserve the forgiveness of you and my classmates." The head teacher said, "No, no one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. Besides, we should judge by actions, not thoughts. Since you didn't even plan to send this love letter, it's an attempt, and an attempt doesn't count as a mistake. As long as you don't send this love letter, the teacher won't blame you." I shook my head again and said, "If I don't read it now, I won't have another chance later." The next second, I directly continued reading, "When you see this love letter, I've already packed my bags and left. Please allow me to say goodbye to you willfully. I won't be able to spend the last half year with you." The head teacher was about to stop me from reading, but when she heard this, she interrupted me with a puzzled look. "What do you mean? What do you mean by left? Aren't you going to study in the second half of the year?" I didn't answer her question and continued reading the love letter. "I'm sorry that I can't enter the university campus. I long to experience youth like others, but I can't afford to waste the precious 4 years. Especially 4 years later, when you're 28, those suitors around you will probably have become pillars of society, while I'll just be a green hand guy." The head teacher was speechless. The whole class was deathly silent, and everyone stared at me blankly. My mom stopped crying and looked at me in confusion, asking, "The girl you mentioned, she's 24 years old this year, 6 years older than you?" I replied, "Yeah." My mom then asked, "Isn't she in this school?" I replied, "Yeah." The head teacher quickly interjected, "Maybe she's a repeat student. This kid has repeated 6 grades. It's really improper. After you go back this time, I'll find out clearly and tell you who she is right away." My dad asked, "Teacher Sophia, how old are you this year?" The head teacher stammered, well, that." I walked over, stared straight into the head teacher's eyes, and said, "Teacher Sophia, don't you understand yet? The person I deeply love is you." Sophia was already a bit dizzy and almost fell. She quickly held onto the podium behind her. I put down the love letter, looked at her with a smile, and said, 2 years ago, you happily and blissfully told us that this was your first time being a head teacher, and you would do your best to lead us well. 10 years ago, I also happily and blissfully told myself that this was the first time someone hugged me, making me feel a temperature I'll never forget in my life. You may not remember the tenderness you casually showed back then, but I'm that silly, infatuated guy. Fate arranged for us to meet, and it also made me see the distance between us clearly. I originally planned to spend this semester, cherishing every day as if it were the last day we spent together. But now, it's better to draw a perfect end to this." The head teacher swallowed hard and stared at me blankly. I helped my mom up, bowed deeply to the head teacher, and said, "I won't cause you any trouble, and the Education Bureau won't talk to you either. Because the moment you found my love letter, I had already submitted my withdrawal application to the principal's office. I smiled softly and said, "Goodbye, dear teacher Sophia." The window wasn't closed, and a gentle breeze blew into the classroom, flipping the pages of the books and stirring her hair. She panicked, reached out her hand to smooth her hair, and took the love letter from me in a daze. Everyone in the class stared at us in shock. At this moment, everyone was so quiet that not a single word of discussion could be heard. She flipped through the love letter and saw the 3 characters Sophia written on it. Finally, her cheeks turned bright red. In the past, when there was a confession situation, the classmates in the class loved to make noise. But today, facing this scene, no one made a sound. I took my mom's hand and walked out. When the head teacher saw this, she got anxious, rushed up, and grabbed my hand. We came to the corridor. As soon as we left the classroom, a burst of heated discussion immediately erupted in the class. The windows were opened one after another, and many classmates couldn't help but peek at us. I looked back at Sophia. She lowered her head and held my hand tightly. Still, no one dared to make noise, but some people secretly violated the school rules and took out their phones to take pictures of us. I said softly, "Teacher Sophia, this isn't very good." The head teacher quickly let go of my hand, stood there, and her face was completely red. She said with a bit of earnestness, "Can we talk?" I asked, "Do you remember me?" "The park in front of the hospital 10 years ago." Sophia looked at my face and finally said in a low voice, "I remember, but I didn't expect you to still remember." More and more people gathered in the corridor to watch. Perhaps fearing the eyes of the crowd, the head teacher asked me, "Can we find a place where no one is around and talk things through?" I shook my head and refused, "No. I know very well that you're safe under the eyes of so many people. If we talk privately, rumors will spread everywhere, and the principal will surely make it impossible for you to continue working. I long to be alone with you, but I can't harm you." Sophia's eyes were slightly moist. Under the eyes of everyone, she finally took off the serious look she usually had and became the girl she used to be. She asked, "Have you really been looking for me all this time?" I responded with an hmm. She stubbornly raised her head and asked me, "So you really won't study anymore? You've always said you wanted to strive, but not even going to college, do you deserve these 10 years? I said, "Striving isn't limited to the campus. People strive for different goals throughout their lives. When I devote my whole life to loving and engaging in an industry, that's also proof of my efforts, isn't it?" Sophia didn't know how to refute and anxiously said, "How about finishing your studies? I can act as if nothing happened, and you can continue to be a good student and take the college entrance examination honestly." I said, "But I like you." She was stunned and asked blankly, "What does whether you go to college or not have to do with liking me?" I explained, "When I graduate, those outstanding peers around you may have become company executives, while I, after going through college step by step, can at most become an intern in a big company. So I have my own plans." Sophia couldn't help but say, "You're crazy. What kind of dignity are you competing for with a group of people older than you?" I said, "I've been crazy since the day I fell in love with you." Sophia said with a sobbing voice, "But I thought you'd say something like asking me to wait for you for 4 years." I asked in confusion, "Why should I be so selfish as to ask you to wait for me and waste your wonderful youth? Moreover, even if you agreed, maybe it would just be a delaying tactic, right?" Sophia got anxious. She grabbed my arm and said excitedly, "Aren't you being selfish too? If you didn't like me, you could study in college well. Under the pretext of loving me, saying you can't wait and giving up your important 4 years, making me feel guilty for the rest of my life, isn't this selfish?" In a fit of anxiety, Sophia even raised her hand to slap me, but in the end, the slap didn't land. I quickly shook my head and said, "No, it's not like that. Please don't think that way. I didn't change my choice because of you, but for you. One is the reason, and the other is the purpose. You didn't ask me to change. This is my own decision. It's like the difference between someone being forced and threatened to commit a crime and me committing a crime for a friend. The causal relationships are completely different. You shouldn't feel guilty about this. It's all my own choice." Sophia wiped away her tears and cried, "You've already handed in the love letter. Don't you want an answer? I can answer you right now. As long as you're willing to finish the college entrance examination, I'll be your girlfriend." Before she could finish speaking, I reached out my hands and hugged her. Sophia was stunned. I held her tightly, just like that time 10 years ago, with the same temperature and the same lavender scent. However, I was no longer that little boy. I whispered in her ear, "No, I prepared this love letter not to get your response, so I never planned to hand it in. Because I know what a teacher-student relationship means, and I also know what you might lose because of it. I paused and then continued, I'm an adult now and will take responsibility for my actions. This isn't a decision made on impulse but a result of weighing the pros and cons. Going to college is one path in life, but it's not a necessary one. From a macroscopic perspective, people who have gone to college do have more and broader paths, but for my personal special situation, it may not be the case. In reality, with my family's conditions, going to college means taking on student loans, and the future environment isn't very friendly to undergraduates. There are so many graduates every year, and the employment pressure is likely to increase year by year. Not to mention that I have to wait another 4 years, and the situation may be even more severe then. However, the most important thing is that the path I plan to take doesn't require 4 years to learn knowledge. Sophia pursed her lips and didn't speak, seemingly not agreeing with my view. I then said, if you're willing, I'd like to make an agreement with you. Sophia was held in my arms and even forgot to push me away. I could feel her heart beating very fast. She stuttered and asked, what agreement? I said, I'll come to you 2 years later. She cried and said, in just 2 years, what kind of future can you make? I smiled and said, if I can't make a future, it means I haven't gone all out for you. I let go of her, admired her lovely appearance one last time, and finally turned around and left, leaving only one sentence, I'll come to you 2 years later. Sophia's story. I stood there stupidly, watching him leave. My heart ached sharply. I covered my chest, and the pain made it hard for me to breathe. He thought I had forgotten, but I've always remembered that crying little boy. 10 years ago, when I was still in middle school, someone told me that recently someone had been secretly asking about me. I felt very strange. After all, in school, if a stranger asks about you, there are usually only 2 possibilities, either being pursued by some strange person or being beaten up after school. I told this to my best friend, and she was also very angry. So, we summoned up our courage and wanted to see who was asking about me. Finally, when we saw a little boy shyly pulling a male classmate, saying, Big brother, I want to ask you something, we couldn't help but burst out laughing. I told this to my best friend again, and she sighed, poor kid, he's so young. I rolled my eyes helplessly and said, maybe the kid just wants to say thank you to me. But after that, things became a bit different. It was all because my best friend was too curious. She also started an investigation after the little boy asked about me. Coincidentally, her sister was in the same school as the little boy. Finally, she excitedly reported the little boy's situation to me. I already knew that he skipped classes every day to go home and cook and make medicine for his seriously ill mother. I also knew that he found out my grades and never skipped classes again from that day on. However, at first, I didn't take these things to heart. Who would take a kid's things seriously? But my best friend was very concerned about this. She always excitedly told me that the little boy had improved his grades by hundreds of places, was among the top 10 in the school in the exam, and that he was determined to get into the high school I had attended. I didn't find it annoying. After all, I like to see people working hard and making progress. At first, I just listened to it as gossip, even though I was the heroine of the story. Until I returned to my hometown to be a teacher, and he walked into my classroom. The first time I saw him, I wanted to tell him that I remembered him. But I didn't dare because the way he looked at me was different, full of sincerity, enthusiasm, and an indescribable feeling. When my best friend knew about this, she was so excited that she kept patting my shoulder, and the force almost broke my bones. I told her not to think nonsense, that it was impossible. But she bit the straw of her milk tea and said excitedly, girl, don't kid me. Such a good boy, when he becomes an adult, you too. I said helplessly, it's impossible. I'm his teacher. My best friend muttered, then resign. Anyway, you were forced by your family to be a teacher step by step. You never wanted to be a teacher in the first place. I didn't know how to describe my feelings for him. For this little brother, I mostly admired him and didn't have other thoughts. I think any girl would admire a boy who works so hard like him. Until during the break inspection, I found his love letter. When I saw his decision to drop out of school, I was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. I quickly discussed it with my best friend. After hearing this, she was also very shocked and said blankly, you really caused a disaster. I was almost on the verge of collapse and had no mood to listen to her jokes. Just thinking that this admirable little brother was going to give up his studies for me made me feel extremely guilty. Finally, I made a bold decision. I wanted him to hate me. I asked my best friend for advice, but she kept shaking her head and saying, you may underestimate this little brother's determination. I gritted my teeth and said, no matter how firm his determination is, I'll nip his thoughts in the bud. So, I confiscated the love letter, deliberately called the parents, and asked the parent to read it aloud in the class. During this process, I also kept making sarcastic remarks. I had planned that when it was almost done, I would take the love letter back and tear it up. There was no need to finish reading it. After all, boys of this age are very concerned about face. Who could stand such humiliation? I wanted to become the person he hated the most and make him give up on me and go to college safely. But to my surprise, he not only didn't back down but also walked onto the podium and took the initiative to read the love letter. No matter how many people around pointed at him, he seriously finished reading this love letter. I stood there, at a loss. I'm a person who is used to following the rules, but he isn't. I never expected that, as my best friend said, I underestimated his determination. In order to make him finish the college entrance examination, I even thought of using a delaying tactic, lying to him that as long as he finished the college entrance examination, I would be his girlfriend, and then go back on my word after the exam. But the little brother refused me. Looking at his leaving back, for some reason, my heart suddenly ached a bit. Didn't he say he loved me very much? I even agreed to be his girlfriend, even if it was a delaying tactic. Wasn't it good to go to college for me? The little brother left. He suddenly barged into my life and then suddenly left. I didn't want to cry in front of everyone, so I held back my sadness and asked my best friend to pick me up after work. This time, she didn't come with the mentality of listening to gossip. After listening to me, she said seriously, "You're lying to him, right? You'll reject his feelings after he really finishes the college entrance examination?" I didn't say anything. I was also very confused. My best friend continued, "What's so weird about a brother-in-law relationship? He was just a little brother at first. You made things complicated. You've only been forced by your parents to be a teacher for 3 or 4 years, but he's been looking for you for 10 years, right?" I said, "There was a moment when I thought about resigning." She asked, "Which moment?" I said, "When he turned around and left." My best friend said, "I inquired for you. This might make you feel better. It seems that the little brother is learning hairdressing from a boss. He'll probably become one of those flashy guys with dyed hair soon." I was speechless and frowned slightly. I thought, what about the 2-year agreement? He talked big, but in the end, he actually went to learn hairdressing? Even if he's extremely talented, it will take at least 5 years to enter the top tier. But I always felt something was wrong. A man who could persevere for 10 years, I didn't quite believe he would make such a hasty decision. Sure enough, the Education Bureau talked to me. They hoped I would pay attention to the impact and keep a distance from students in the future. They didn't know that this doomed relationship started many years ago. 3 months later, my best friend contacted me again. As soon as she saw me, she said mysteriously, "Something seems wrong." I asked, "What's wrong?" She said, "My sister said that the guy isn't cutting people's hair. He's grooming cats and dogs, and he charges $128 each time. I remember you love kittens the most, but you're too scared to keep one because you're afraid your parents will get mad." I said in surprise, "I really do love kittens. But I only pay $35 for a haircut, and you're telling me it's $128 for a pet grooming?" She said, "That's not the point." I asked, "So where does he work?" She said, "All over the place. He's at the store during the day, sets up a booth by the riverside at night, and even offers home service during holidays. Also, he made an account. I suspect he's trying to build up a fan base and open his own store." I stared blankly and asked, "Doesn't he need to rest?" She said, "I don't know. Let's wait and see. With this intense workload, I don't think he can last more than half a year." Out of curiosity, I searched for his account. The homepage was filled with videos of him grooming pets. In the videos, he wore a mask, focused on grooming the puppies, spoke gently, and moved briskly. There were a few scars on his hands from being scratched by the pets. For some reason, he looked kind of handsome. I shook my head vigorously, telling myself not to think nonsense. A year later, my best friend excitedly told me, "I underestimated that guy. He's opened his own store now." I wasn't really surprised. With his hard-working intensity, probably living and eating at the store, it shouldn't be too hard for him to save enough money for a small store in a year. Although I wasn't surprised, I still couldn't help but check out his account. It was indeed a small store, mainly offering appointment-based services for now. Because of the grand opening discounts, there were a lot of customers. Looking at the appointment schedule, it was fully booked for the whole month. I couldn't help but wonder, doesn't he take any days off? Won't his body break down? Seeing how busy he was, he even posted a video looking for an assistant. A lot of girls who love pets applied, but he politely pinned a reply at the top, saying he hoped the assistant would be male. My best friend asked me seriously, "Are you really going to keep that promise?" I asked, "What promise?" She said, "Are you really going to make him wait for 2 full years? You don't even like this job. He's been chasing after you for 11 years. If you had feelings for him back then, now is the time he needs your help the most. He's been paying the price for his stubbornness because of you. Why don't you be a bit impulsive just this once?" I said, "But my parents set me up on a blind date today. The guy seems decent. I'm thinking, maybe it would be better to just get married to someone my age in an ordinary way." She cursed, "Girl, are you out of your mind?" I looked at my best friend's message, not knowing how to respond. It's easy to say be impulsive once, but if I really did, we'd have to face public scrutiny for the rest of our lives. In the end, I decided to go on the blind date. The guy's conditions were really good. I put on some makeup carefully. Considering the blind date guy's income, I picked a dress with a little trick, creating a look that was 70% innocent and 30% alluring. After I finished my makeup, seeing that I didn't reply, my best friend couldn't help but send me a voice message, scolding, "Can't you be brave just once? Go do the job you really love and face the person who truly likes you." I ignored her and rushed out. I thought to myself, how can I be brave? The blind date guy has an annual income of $500,000. The guy's store is only booming because of the opening discounts. Who knows if it'll stay popular? The blind date guy's parents are both in the government-affiliated institutions, while the guy has to work 14 hours a day just to open his own store. The gap is too big. If I follow the normal path, I can have a good life, a great husband, good family conditions on both sides, and a decent job. But I don't know why. Driving my Wuling Hongguang Mini EV, I ended up heading towards the pet grooming store. The blind date guy sent me a message, asking where we should meet tonight. I replied with a sorry. I parked the car on the street outside the grooming store. It got dark, and I watched the guy busy in the store. From 6 to 8, from 8 to 10, and until 12 at night, the customers in the store finally left. He sat on the chair, exhausted, rubbing his shoulders. He was no longer as childish as before. He learned to put on hair wax, wore French-style work clothes, and with a mask on, he somehow had a charming and somewhat roguish look. I don't know why I sat in the car for so long. I'm usually a very rule-following person and have never done anything so impulsive. Maybe I should leave, I thought. He might have already regretted it. Just then, he took off his mask. Because of the cold and dry weather, he took out a lychee-flavored lip balm from his pocket. Looking at the familiar packaging and brand, for some reason, I got out of the car in a daze and pushed open the store door. The bell rang, and he quickly turned around and said, "Welcome." He was stunned, staring blankly at me, with the lip balm frozen by the side of his mouth. It's been 11 years. He's been the one taking the initiative to get closer all these years. I could have just waited, doing nothing, and see how his financial situation would be after he worked hard for another year. This was clearly the best choice for me. But in my mind, my best friend's words kept echoing, now is the year he needs help the most. I looked at the cat hair on the ground, feeling a bit awkward. I didn't dare to meet his eyes and said in a low voice, "I don't really like being a teacher. I saw you're hiring, and I wanted to ask about the salary." He put away the lip balm, stood up, and walked towards me. Only then did I notice that he was a bit taller than me. Maybe because of our previous relationship, I never paid attention to the height difference before. He said, "The turnover." I asked in confusion, "I'm asking about my salary." He looked into my eyes and said word by word, "Yeah, it's the turnover." I was a bit confused. At this moment, he pulled down the rolling door of the store. I stammered, "I just thought that if I really show up after you become successful in 2 years, would it make me seem like a snob? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I care about you that much. I'm just worried about my reputation." Suddenly, he cupped my face. I was startled, looking into his serious eyes, and panicked, thinking, is he going to kiss me? I got nervous immediately. But he just raised his hand and gently applied the lip balm to my lips, saying, "Your lips are chapped." The atmosphere suddenly became a bit awkward, and neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I said softly, that Chanel scarf was a fake, you dummy. After hearing my answer, he suddenly reached out his hand, trying to hold mine. I quickly stepped aside and said, no. His hand froze in mid-air, looking a bit at a loss. I stammered and explained, you can hold my hand after I finish the resignation process. He replied, okay. I've waited for 11 years. A few more days won't matter. I let out an and then said, I need you to promise me one more thing. He asked, what is it? I said, I don't want you to make hasty decisions because of me. No more night-time business from now on. I'll help you with your studies, and you must take the college entrance examination. If you give up the college entrance examination because of me, I'll never be at peace in my life. He hesitated for a moment, and finally smiled, okay. I thought to myself, my parents are probably going to scold me when I get home tonight. From then on, I helped the guy manage the store during the day and tutored him at night. Sometimes, my mom would scold me, which she had never done before. 3 years later, the guy and I made the store thrive. To save money, we held our wedding in his Zhejiang University entrance celebration banquet on the same day. In the hotel's dressing room, I was in my wedding dress, and he was in a suit. I told him, when you go to college, study management knowledge well. Our store is already quite well known now. When you graduate, it'll be up to you to turn it into a chain brand. He nodded and replied, I added, my mom doesn't scold me anymore. She even praises you for being promising and tells everyone that her son-in-law got into Zhejiang University. He still just said, I couldn't help but ask, why do you keep saying What are you thinking? He said, I want to call you wife. I smiled and replied, call me then. I'm already your wife.